From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Hundreds of millions of dollars flooding into the state, connecting Kansans one Wi-Fi modem at a time. Plus, no flat taxes. The fight at Governor's Vow is setting up. But first, nearly a dozen people injured after at least 2 gunmen opened fire inside a Wichita nightclub. Now, fears about public safety in the city. What can be done about it? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Welcome to Kansas Week. I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Sunday morning began with 11 people hurt, several of them critically, 9 shot and 2 injured out of that in the following rush to escape the random gunfire at an Old Town nightclub. While no one died, it was a shooting that shook the city, especially the families of those hurt, as Cake's Jackson Overstreet shows us.
Sometimes a single picture tells the whole story. This is the moment Tuesday that Terica Standifer hugged her 2-year-old daughter for the first time since Saturday. Standifer was one of the 11 people injured during this chaotic scene at City Nights in Wichita's Old Town over the weekend.
Her spirits are a little better. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Melissa Meyer is Terica's mother. She received a call early Sunday morning from her daughter's boyfriend saying she'd been shot. Earlier that evening, Meyer says all Standifer could talk about was going to the club.
I'm telling you, I haven't seen her this excited in a long time because she works very hard. When she's not working, she's with her baby. And so she thought, I'm gonna go and let my hair down, enjoy some time with my friends.
Standifer is still in critical condition according to Meyer and has already had 1 surgery. Meyer says most likely there will need to be a second, but right now her daughter is stable, making this just the start of a long road of recovery.
You know, we're still in the bed. We're trying to get her up and moving, and she's working really hard to try to be able to do that.
While her daughter gets better, Meyer is still trying to wrap her head around what happened that night. She says any sort of violence like this is completely senseless and is pleading for people to stop and think about how their decisions could potentially impact innocent people around them, like her daughter.
We have to stop this violence. It's ridiculous. Why are we fighting each other? What are we fighting about?
And police are still searching for 2 unnamed suspects. They did make 1 arrest on Sunday, but later released the man, saying it looks like he was firing only in self-defense and defense of others. A lot to consider here. Let's turn to our panelists. Joining me by Zoom, we have Dr. Michael Smith from Emporia State University. And here on the desk with me, we have State Representative Stephen Owens, a Republican from Heston, and Brandon Johnson, former vice chair of the Democratic Party and a Wichita City Councilman. And as we look at this, I have to say a certain lack of surprise, sadly, on my part. I remember a couple years ago, actually more than a couple years ago now, when a news director said, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And not a week later, we had the shootings at Excel. This is something your community has certainly dealt with, Stephen.
Yeah, it definitely is. I remember distinctly the Excel shootings. I live about a half mile from Excel, and seeing that happen. You know, we as a state are doing everything that we can in bolstering those penalties for people that are using firearms in a way such as this, which is tragic. We passed 2 new pieces of legislation this year that took effect July 1st that had to do with felons in possession of firearms and receiving greater penalties, and then firearms being used in the commission of a crime having greater felonies. So it is something that we're very consciously aware of and working towards those penalties to correct that.
And Brandon, in your position as a leader in the city, are there discussions going on as far as what can be done? It just seems like every week, especially every weekend, we're having more and more shootings.
Violence is something that we continue to talk about for sure, and what ways we can, really engage with the community. It's going to take all of us to do more, but in this situation, it seems that these establishments have to have security. The security cannot give passes to folks. There's no reason guns should have even been in that club. Mm-hmm. That's an opportunity for folks to go out, have a good time, blow off some steam, dance, listen to music, and instead there were, 4 guns found in that space. That should have never happened. Security should have never let anyone in with a weapon. And again, as a community, we all have to do more to address violence.
And Michael, as we look at this issue and others like it, not unique to Wichita or even to Kansas, we're seeing this happening all over the country right now.
Well, we are, and there's fascinating and for us, a disturbing thing going on. The good news is in America's biggest cities like New York and Chicago, the crime rate is coming down. Now, I know for a lot of us Midwesterners that goes against stereotypes, but the data are what they are. The crime rate is down in those bigger cities. In our medium-sized and smaller cities like Kansas City and Wichita, it's going up. And that's a real puzzle. We need to figure that out. We need to turn that around. The city of Omaha has had some remarkable luck, dramatically lowering their murder rate. And I know Kansas City, Missouri has sent some folks up there to study what's going on up there and what's working. Maybe Wichita might want to do the same.
Certainly something for us to keep an eye on. On the state level, a feud over your taxes is brewing. The governor vowing no flat taxes for Kansas. But Republican leaders saying it's the first thing we should spend the state's nearly $1 billion surplus on. Rebecca Chung with the KSN Capitol Bureau explains.
Well, it looks like the state is rolling in dough. The governor is pushing for more tax relief next year. Still, Democrats and Republicans may clash over which proposal works best. Kansas is ending the fiscal year with more money than expected. The latest report shows that the state raked in $989 million this June. That caps off the fiscal year with more than $10 billion in tax receipts, $26 million ahead of projections.
We're going to sort of replay what we tried this past legislative session.
The governor is signaling a renewed push for tax relief. This year, that included cutting taxes on Social Security, property, and groceries. She also proposed a one-time tax rebate of at least $450 for Kansas taxpayers.
I will propose another reasonable, generous tax cut program so that we can get money back to Kansas taxpayers.
Republicans tied the tax relief package to a single rate income tax of 5.15%, which received pushback from top Democrats. The state Senate failed to override the governor's veto of the package this session.
Truly, it's just her saying, I don't want a single rate tax, no matter what, which we knew that. We knew she didn't want it, but we do, and our people want it.
The governor could bump heads with the Republican-controlled legislature again next year.
We're going to come back next year, and we're going to do the tax plan again. Will it be exactly the same? We don't know that until it comes out, but we will do probably a tax plan that mirrors it a lot.
I'm not open to saying yes to a flat tax. What I am willing to sit down and talk with them about is looking at the package that I did propose, and are there some other things that we can add to that.
And the governor says she's committed to working with the legislature to pass a tax relief plan next year. She says that depends on how fiscally responsible it is. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And Michael, I'm going to start with you on this. It doesn't sound like there's much new in the way of positions here. Is there any room for compromise between these two positions?
That's a great point. You know, it's kind of refreshing to hear Democrats and Republicans argue about taxes instead of the culture war, which gets so exhausting. This is an oldie but a goodie. And they both want tax cuts, but they want to do it differently. Typically on an issue like taxes, yes, Pilar, there is more room for negotiations. It doesn't polarize people the way that culture war issues do, and it's not as emotional. There's some emotion in it, but it's not quite the same. And that said, they are pretty far apart. And there's just a perpetual campaign where everybody's always posturing for the next election. So in theory, I would say yes, that would be a distinct possibility. But we didn't see it in the last session. Maybe if we get the next round of elections over with, we can give it another shot.
So not next year, but maybe the year after. And Brandon, you've worked a lot with Democrats across the state. Do you see some Democrats ever reaching the point of saying, okay, this version of a flat tax I could support?
I don't see Democrats supporting a flat tax because those of us who are lower income who might pay less than that are punished because they'll have to pay a higher tax rate, while those who may pay more benefit from it. And I don't think Democrats would support a non-tiered tax relief program. It sounds like everybody's on the same page and wants some form of tax cut, but I don't think the flat tax will get any support.
But it's important to realize that tax package had eliminating food sales tax early. It had property tax relief, which would benefit everybody. It had increase in standard deductions so that those that you are concerned about actually receive some significant tax breaks as well. Moving to a flat tax is part of the compromise. And that's what we didn't see out of the governor. And that's why so many of the things that she proposed was put in there, is because, yeah, it does make sense to go to a flat tax. But we added all these other things that maybe we didn't necessarily think now was the timing to try to come to that compromise. That's ultimately what this is. She chose not to compromise, and therefore, state sits on over $2 billion of the people's money, and they need it back now more than ever.
So I think with that, I think the challenge I've always seen from the legislature, and I won't even say party, is when we have a surplus like that, we always say, let's give this money back. Mm-hmm. But we know there are strategic investments we could make right now. So while the legislature did some really good work investing in mental health hospitals and things like that, we could do more. You know, we're 5,000 beds down from the 90s. We could make those investments. If there's other one-time things we could do, this would be a great time to do it while also looking at a tax plan for the next year. But if we're just giving that money back out, then the state will continue to struggle with these things we don't have.
Which is why a one-time tax payment makes absolutely no sense. It does nothing to move the state farther. When you look at the spending that we have done this year with the surplus that ultimately exists, I mean, look, we're dealing with 10% inflation. Thankfully, we're starting to see that come down, but everybody is feeling that more and more in their pocketbooks. It's not fair for us as a state to continue to hold on to their money when every single person in the state could benefit by having that back in a comprehensive tax package that was proposed.
And Michael, as we're talking about this and this urgency perhaps to spend down the surplus that we have, do you think that could ever reach the point where it overwhelms the disagreements on a tax cut?
I think it could. We have to be careful here because some of that is one-time money. A big chunk of that surplus is federal aid that's actually a result of Biden administration policies passed by Congress. That it looks, tax cuts sound good right now, and I can see how some tax cuts would be reasonable, but it's important to keep in mind, if you lock in a new tax rate and then state revenues drop, you're stuck with that, and you still have to fund essential state services.
About perhaps a compromise this next year, but next year is also an election year, and that kind of changes the equation on things.
Well, it absolutely does. I think it'll be competing pressures, right? Because on the one hand, politicians want to get something done. They want to go home to the constituents and say, look, we did it. We got you a tax break, just like we said we would. But on the other hand, I think part of this is true ideological liberal versus conservative. It really is. It's principled. But part of it is also nobody wants the other side to get any credit for anything. And I think that's what part of it is too, that real compromise requires that you share the credit. And there's a lot of resistance to that on both sides, I think.
All right. Well, speaking about elections, if you're not registered to vote in the coming city elections, you're running out of time. The deadline is this week. Usually you would see groups like the League of Women Voters out running registration drives, but not this year. They say a new law banning impersonation of election workers is so poorly written, they can't take the chance. In fact, they're challenging it in court. But is their absence hurting registration rolls? KAKE's Jocelyn Schifferdecker takes a look at the registration numbers and what you need to do if you want to vote but aren't registered yet.
Time is running out. The deadline to register to vote for the upcoming Sedgwick County primary election is next Tuesday.
People have until Tuesday, July 11th at 11:59 p.m. to register.
Last year, the election board saw a spike in the amount of people registered to vote due to the constitutional amendment over abortion being on the ballot. This year, it hasn't seen that same increase, but Laura Rainwater, the Sedgwick County election commissioner, says the county expects similar numbers to mayoral elections in 2021 and 2019.
It's always been at 10 to 15%.
If you are 18 years or older on the day of the election, a U.S. citizen, and live in Sedgwick County, you're able to register to vote. You can do this in person at the election office or online at votekansas.gov. Either way, it only takes a quick minute.
Since I just moved here from Oklahoma about 1 month ago, I'm actually not registered to vote here in Sedgwick County, but we're going to get that taken care of right now.
Yep.
All right, so what do I need to do?
What you're going to do is you're going to fill this form out. You have to fill out the top 2 questions. You also have to give us the name that you'd want to be registered under, your current residential address where you actually live. We need your date of birth and your ID.
After After submitting your information, you'll get a voter registration card in the mail. To see your voter status, make sure all information is up to date and make sure that you're actually registered. Check the link on our website, cake.com. In downtown Wichita, Jocelyn Schifferdecker, Cake News, on your side.
Now, of course, communities that would first be hit by any lowering in voter registration would be those that traditionally are underregistered, such as African American, Native American, Latino, etc. Are you seeing a difference in your district, which is, I believe, majority African American?
I'm seeing a difference in events throughout the district all over. You don't have the same groups out trying to register folks to vote because they're worried about being prosecuted because of the new law. And they've all said that as well. They just don't want any type of legal actions from that, and none of them have been accused of doing anything wrong in the past. So it's just unfortunate that this new law is making them not do it.
Well, the new law is really, I mean, what that new law does is it's impersonation of an election worker, right? And so if you're impersonating an election worker, then yeah, you certainly need to be held accountable for that. But these groups that go out and do these things, that is a fear that they've created, because going out and encouraging people to register to vote, I know certainly is still happening up in Harvey County and other areas of the state.
All right. And at the same time that we are getting these numbers, we got a statewide audit of voter and election security across Kansas. And Michael, I'm going to bring you in on this. That audit raised some questions about how security was handled in certain areas.
It did. It did not raise any questions about any type of widespread voter fraud, which was, there seemed to be the pressure to initiate it, partly coming from Johnson County Sheriff Calvin Hayden. And as a matter of fact, those bigger urban counties like Johnson and Sedgwick have the more secure procedures. And the challenges in the rural counties are mostly technical, often having to do with people signing things for chain of custody, which has to do with the fact that they have less money and they're smaller and they're more reliant on volunteers. There's no evidence of any intentional voter fraud whatsoever, but there is some evidence that volunteer election workers, and we're so grateful for them and for what they do. They get paid nothing or very, very little. But they need more training, and there needs to be more consistency. There have been anecdotal accounts for years of people being given incorrect information by well-meaning poll workers because the training just isn't quite up to snuff. And so that's a challenge for the Secretary of State and for the counties. We appreciate our volunteers, but they need to know the law and follow it to the letter.
Perhaps some changes coming in legislation then on that?
Possibly so. You know, what we saw in that audit was that, as the gentleman recommended or mentioned, that truly we found that our elections are secure. And I've said that for a long time. Kansas has a phenomenal election system. We have more checks and balances than the vast majority of states do. Matter of fact, I believe we were ranked 5th in the nation for the tightest election integrity last year. So very confident there. Certainly very concerning when we send our auditors out to do work and they don't get answers. They were completely shut out of Ford County, for example, that they would not provide them any information or allow any access to the data. Things like that is what leads people to question election integrity. So the more open and the more transparent we can be, the better.
Brandon?
I absolutely agree with that. Probably one of the things I don't have a whole lot of response to.
There you go.
Our elections are secure. So.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that all Kansans can agree on. Yep. All right. Well, nearly $500 million of federal funding is coming to Kansas to help bridge the digital divide by improving broadband access to the internet. Kix Jackson Overstreet looks at how that money could change some Kansans' lives.
As you can see, I've got lots of orders packed and ready to go.
For Jacqueline Leffler, the last 3 years have been a whirlwind for her ranch up in Americus, Kansas, near Emporia. She started directly selling her beef online during the coronavirus pandemic.
No one could find beef on the grocery store shelves, and I thought, I'm going to really capitalize on this. And I sold to over 1,500 people that year and did 170 head of cattle.
Sales numbers have stayed at that level since 2020, but she says one thing that hasn't been able to keep up is her internet service.
It's still quicker for us to mail a flash drive to the people that are helping us with our data decisions than it is to upload it and send it that way.
Leffler is far from the only rural Kansan who deals with this problem. The state is trying to fix that.
We live in an increasingly technological-driven society.
In the last few weeks, Kansas was awarded $451 million of federal money to improve broadband infrastructure. The state's broadband office says it's working on a 5-year strategic plan on how to bring reliable internet to all Kansans. And this money will help fund a lot of that.
Internet service providers will be applying for these funds, but also municipalities, nonprofits, co-ops. There are other groups that are called eligible entities that have the ability to apply for these funds.
The state says this money will start being doled out across Kansas in 2024. In the meantime, Leffler says her farm is getting broadband in the next few months, something she hopes other farms and ranches will be able to experience.
So I'm excited to join the rest of the world with high-speed internet, and I can't imagine the possibilities that are at the tips of our fingers that we're about to get.
In Wichita, Jackson Overstreet, Cake News on your side.
And improving rural broadband, one of the things not only lawmakers but also the governor and a bipartisan push have really been working on in the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely has. And that's where we've spent a lot of our COVID dollars that have come into the state. I mean, we've seen it in Harvey County in a number of our communities that have had fiber laid that wouldn't have been put there had it not been for some of the subsidies. You know, I have real concerns over the amount of where our federal debt is and federal spending, but again, taking that money, being able to apply and increase internet is going to be hugely beneficial to everybody in Kansas.
Certainly. Now, we do still also have some broadband holes, shall we say, in central cities like in Wichita. More about finances there, though, personal finances, than about access.
Yeah, a lot of it is the finances as well, but also access to higher speed internet, because you know a lot of those upgrades have to happen, and some of the private businesses are doing so. But COVID taught us it's a necessity. It's not one of those things that you can want to have if you want to work in this new economy, go to school in this new economy. You need access to internet, so this is a great investment for our state.
Certainly, and I know Senator Tyson years ago told me she wanted to make Kansas the new lodestone for remote work, and broadband access would definitely be necessary for that.
So funny little story, I actually reached out to Starlink, you might have heard of that, an Elon Musk company, to try to see if Kansas could partner with them to be their first state that they blanket. Unfortunately, their response was, thank you, we don't need your money, we just need more satellites in the air. So hey, we tried.
Well, one way or the other, we'll figure it out.
There you go.
Homelessness is a persistent issue in cities across Kansas, particularly when it comes to our veterans. This week, several agencies partnered up with the goal of reaching what's called functional zero homelessness in the veteran community here in Wichita. Kate's Nick Nelson tells us how the community plans to meet that challenge.
The city of Wichita is partnering with United Way of the Plains, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and Sedgwick County to effectively end veteran homelessness in Wichita by the end of next year.
Homelessness is a complex social issue, and it will take a collective community response to bring it to functional zero.
The City of Wichita's Housing and Community Services Department will play a crucial role in achieving the goal. Director Sally Stang says the department plans to work with landlords on finding a way to provide the roughly 32 veterans a place to stay.
We're going to have to prove that we've got a system in play that as new veterans enter into homelessness, it's brief and non-reoccurring, and that we have systems in place to quickly move them into housing.
Although veteran homelessness remains an urgent issue in Wichita, VA Director Chandra Miller says a lot has been done recently to bring the number down to what it is today. She adds she's confident the city can reach this goal.
Locally, we contributed to that effort by providing housing for 115 veterans experiencing homelessness, exceeding our goal for the year by nearly 12%.
Mayor Brandon Whipple admits it will be tough to achieve zero homelessness among veterans, but says he's confident this new united front can get the job done, saying he hopes the city can focus on chronic homelessness once the goal is reached.
And I think that with the VA here, it's an indication that there are services that are funded by the federal government that we can actually integrate at a more local level and even come alongside and hopefully make those services more effective.
In Wichita, Nick Nelson, Cake News on your side.
Now, a lot of communities love to thank veterans for their service, but I think few Kansans really realize just how many homeless veterans are on our streets, Michael. Certainly an issue that's much more serious than appears at surface level.
It is. Unfortunately, veterans are overrepresented among the homelessness. Also, unfortunately, homelessness is going up. And again, like with the some other challenges, it seems to be hitting medium-sized cities the hardest in some ways on a proportional basis. The good news is there's a regional resource that can be very helpful. Former Missouri Secretary of State Jason Kander, an Afghanistan veteran himself, as part of a veterans community project in Kansas City, which is really a national leader in, among other things, building tiny houses for veterans and also getting them social services. So with a really good resource right in the region, I think there are a number of things that Wichita can tap into, and kudos to the city for making this a priority.
And certainly one of the various resources available to the city of Wichita on this.
Yeah, I personally believe no one who served our country should be homeless. We should be doing everything we can to help them out. So I'm glad to see this effort happening, and hopefully we can achieve that goal by next year. But this has been something that we've been talking about, and definitely grateful for partners like the United Way trying to help us get to functional zero.
Yeah, and I completely agree. You know, on a state level, I was just at a meeting earlier today in Topeka where we're looking at specialty courts, one of those being veterans treatment courts, right? Because we recognize that so much of what is driving people to homelessness is substance use and mental health related issues. We know that when we get them into those specialty court settings, we can surround them with services and support them and help lift them back up. And so I absolutely stand with Brandon in his statement.
Do you see any further aids? Because a lot of these groups rely on donations and grants in order to fund their activities. Is there anything else that the city or the state can do to help support them that you can think of?
Yeah, that's part of what we're actually doing with the specialty court task force. We're looking at those federal funds. We passed legislation last year that kind of created the structure to receive those funds, to apply for those grants on a state level that we haven't had in the past. And so that will open up additional funding, whether it's through the VA or other housing authorities or things like that, to help not only veterans, but anybody else and help lift them out of homelessness as well.
And I would say after that work is done, if we identify any other gaps, then all levels of government can figure out how we can fill those effectively.
All right. Well, thank you both so much, and thank you, Michael, as well, for joining us this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, KSN News, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue this conversation with you on social media. You can find me, Pilar Pedraza TV, and PBS Kansas on most social media sites, including that new one called Threads. Just tag us or use the hashtag KansasWeek spelled out. For now, stay safe and have a great week.